I recently found an email with a link to a StoryCorps interview that someone had sent me some months ago. The speakers, cantor Natalie Young and her husband Rabbi David Young, spoke about their experiences with Dr. George Tiller, who was, until he was murdered, one of only a handful of doctors in the country who would perform a late-term abortion. Natalie and David spoke about their horrific experience finding out almost at the end of Natalie's pregnancy that the fetus inside her, which would have been a son, would not have lived. Consequently, they chose to seek abortion, and they traveled to Dr. Tiller. In this StoryCorps recording, the couple described how caring Dr. Tiller was, understanding this horrific, terrible decision before them to abort a fetus or wait until Natalie delivered a baby and see him die. The story struck me for so many reasons. It was awful. It was sad. And it felt very close to home, perhaps because of the couple's professions and also because Natalie is a new friend we've met through the Institute of Jewish Spirituality. We're in the clergy cohort together. I didn't know her story. I was devastated. It was honest and so sad. And it reminded me that this couple made a choice that no one would ever want to make after hearing news that no one would ever imagine hearing, and they made a decision for the health of their family and for Natalie's health. Thank God they were able to access the care they needed and the abortion that they chose to go forward with. Listening to the story reminded me, too, that the Young story, is by no means everyone's story. But it did remind me that there are so many stories that none of us know. We know people, we are related to people, we have friends who encountered decisions along these lines. And hearing their story reminded me, too, that it has been way too long since I've spoken on this subject. The truth is, I think about this topic a lot. People call, people have questions, I watch the news, I watch the legislation, but I don't act enough, and I imagine many of you are in the same camp, though I don't know. I think the last time I spoke in a formal sermon about reproductive choice was 2004. And so with gratitude to the Torah reading cycle that brings up the topic this week, and I'll explain that in a few minutes, and a wealth of material from the National Council of Jewish Women, who have dubbed the Shabbat as Repro Shabbat, I'd like to reflect a little bit on the Jewish vantage of abortion and reproductive choice, reproductive justice. And whatever your view, I invite you to enter the texts of our tradition with an open mind. This is no easy subject for any of us. So in Torah this week, in the Torah portion Mishpatim, we find ourselves amidst a long list of commandments, the continuation of what our ancestors received at Sinai, despite the particular focus on the 10. There are civil and ritual discussions, commandments, mitzvot about holidays, rules about property, judicial conduct, and kashrut, what is okay to eat and what is not. And tucked into a list of situations about bodily injury caused by people and animals, we find this. I share with you what the Torah says. When two or more parties fight, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage ensues, the person responsible shall be fined, according to a reckoning made with the person's husband, or the woman's husband, But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. This passage in Exodus about the men fighting differentiates between the mother and the fetus, namely that the mother is a nefesh, a life, and if her life is lost, it is payable with the taking of another life. The fetus, though, is not yet a life. We see this because the loss of the fetus is compensated with a monetary amount to be determined in conversation with the woman's husband, which is another conversation. If the fetus were regarded as a life, then the text would have called it a life and said that its death or its demise would be payable with the taking of another life. This text is the precedent for centuries of Jewish law that start with this assumption that a fetus is not yet a life. The rabbis tackle this throughout the generations to our current day. Subsequent Jewish texts are clear. In the eyes of the rabbis, a fetus is not a life until the majority, generally including the head or the head and shoulders, has emerged from the mother. And until that point, the mother is the priority. She is a nefesh, a life, and anything that endangers her, that puts her at risk, is considered a rodef, a pursuer, one that endangers her, and her life comes first. To that end, the text says, even if the fetus endangers the mother in the smallest of ways, and it could be physical health or mental health, the rabbis throughout the ages take this on, even if there is a slight danger, abortion is justified. For sure, though, this decision of abortion is not to be taken lightly. But what the rabbis are clear on throughout the chain of the tradition of our text is that if the fetus will cause great danger or great pain to the mother, then there is reason to justify aborting that fetus. That's a lot. It's a lot to wrestle with. The text chain is actually really fascinating because the rabbis show compassion and concern for the mother. And again note that the fetus is to be treated like a limb of the mother, like an arm or a leg. And while compassionate, our tradition is clear that abortion is an action of great seriousness. Nowhere is it advocated lightly, but it is permitted and, when needed, encouraged to preserve the health of the mother. The striking backdrop for this, thinking about this and other matters of reproductive rights, is twofold. There are two key Jewish values that so many of you are familiar with that provide the backdrop for thinking of this decision process or this issue of abortion. The first is the Jewish view of the sanctity of life and the importance of pikuach nefesh, the saving of a life. Life is sacred, life is valued, and pikuach nefesh, the saving of the life, is the preeminent value. We are to violate many things, including Shabbat, for those who are traditionally Shabbat observant, in order to save a life. Second, our Jewish understanding of justice. From that basic yet powerful command in Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue, to the many mitzvot that remind us to take care of those in our communities who are in need and at risk. Our goal as Jews is laid out before us. We are to make the world more fair and more just. Right? That's challenging for sure. Ideally, decisions of reproductive choice, decisions of abortion, decisions about one's body and one's health, for men and women for that matter, ideally these are personal decisions, ones to be made within the confines of one's relationships and one's family, calling in the opinions and thoughts and rulings of those we know and we've asked. But let's face it, here we are in February 2021. In January, just weeks ago, in the Supreme Court's first ruling on abortion since the arrival of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the court reinstated a federal requirement that women seeking to end their pregnancies using medications, must pick up a pill in person from a hospital or medical office. This places, in the words of one dissenting Supreme Court justice, an undue burden on the woman. As well, the new balance of the Supreme Court, though, is just the start. In the United States, over 450 restrictions on abortion access have been passed since 2011, in the last decade. These range from abortion bans to biased counseling mandates to medically unnecessary regulations imposing onerous requirements on providers and patients. And at least 18 cases in the lower courts that could make their way to the Supreme Court and pose a real threat to Roe versus Wade. Roe v. Wade being the 1973 Supreme Court decision that affirmed that access to a safe and legal abortion is a constitutional right. In other words, reproductive rights are endangered. And when access to abortion and other health care is endangered, many are hurt. And those often who are hurt the most are those who are already the most at risk. In other words, the impact is more unjust, more unfair. Statistics tell us that African Americans and American Indian and Alaska Natives are 3 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes than white Americans. 3 times as likely to die than white Americans. Restricting abortion access disproportionately impacts those who are already marginalized in our society. People who are struggling financially, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, young people, those in rural communities, immigrants, people living with disabilities, and LGBTQ individuals. These people are already at risk, and shouldn't be, but are in our society. So restrictions on reproductive choice make their lives even more challenging. And while abortion is technically still available in our country, it is for many utterly inaccessible. And it threatens to become more inaccessible as the protections of Roe are whittled away. So thus we see that the decisions of personal health and reproduction are as well decisions of justice, when minority and marginalized communities bear a disproportionate brunt of the decisions and legislation in our country. So as we look to realities of reproductive choice, our Jewish tradition challenges us to think and to act. Whatever our personal faith and principled thoughts are on abortion, we are obligated to act with the goal of preserving life and pursuing justice. The goal of providing women with the ability to make their own decisions, those right for their health and the health of their families. The goal of not endangering or placing obstacles to health and well-being of anyone. So what do? Certainly we can advocate. We can let our voices be heard by our representatives in Congress, asking them to support 2 pieces of legislation. Ask them to support the Women's Health and Health Protection Act, which would make a federal safeguard against the bans. And the Each Woman Act would restore a moral agency to all pregnant people, regardless of their income and regardless of their insurance coverage. That means that women who are receiving aid from the government would not have restrictions on the reproductive choices. We can allow each woman to make her own decisions, each family, without government interference. Something else. Indeed, we can do something else. For the truth is that many of us, probably more than we realize, know families like the Youngs who have made difficult reproductive decisions. As I wrote this sermon, I thought of several. People I knew who made the decisions, people I might have spoken with about, and maybe not. Maybe I just knew. I don't know. We might not even know that we know people. But just as I found Natalie Young as I listened to her story, and I thought of other friends and family who have made these decisions, I realized that I need to do something. I need to open the door to listening, to supporting them, even if their decisions were made years and decades ago. Now, to be clear, they may not want to speak. But we all have the opportunity to open the door to a supportive space, to listen to the stories of those we know if they want to tell, to care, to do something as simple as naming the difficult decision they faced last month, last year, last decade. To just say, I'm sorry you faced this, and I'm sorry I didn't say anything then, I didn't know, or I didn't know what to say, but just name it. Name their pain. Listen with loving ears. Support them. This is a small but mighty act. It is an act that each of us can do. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, may this be ours.